Here on this channel, we talk a lot about the spirit of place and the very fundamental connection that you can have with your home. I recently did an interview with a Feng Shui consultant whose work with spaces has a lot in common with the work that I do as a house healer. And one of the things we talked about was the impact and support of a spiritual outlook on life. Hello there, my name's Tim Walter. I'm a house healer and an alternative life coach. This channel is about connecting your inner world to the outer environment for wellness through techniques of mindfulness, meditation and dowsing. So if that sounds like the sort of thing that you'll find interesting, click on the subscribe, click the grey bell icon to get notified every time I upload a video or do a live Q&A. A few days ago I spoke with a Feng Shui consultant and teacher, Maureen K Calamia. Maureen is a thought leader in Feng Shui, energy and consciousness. She's written for Huffington Post, MindBodyGreen, Elephant Journal and OMTimes. In this Zoom interview we touch on not only Feng Shui but also spirituality, the nature of being human and how working with the environment at a subtle level can open us all up to really great things. What I'd really like to do is I'd like you to just tell me a little bit about who you are and how you got into Feng Shui.
So I actually started getting interested in some of the esoteric topics when I was about 12 years old. I started studying astrology and really got into that and actually cast my own birth chart. And this was, of course, in the 1970s when there was no software. So it was quite a feat to figure out how to do that. And I was pretty good because I still have that chart. But then I kind of went into your basic stuff of, getting involved in college and working in Manhattan. I worked as a marketing account manager for probably 25 years. But during the kind of end of that time of my life, I started getting more interested in getting back into the spiritual aspects of life. You know, life kind of throws you some curveballs, and those are our points of challenge to say, are you going to come back? Are you going to learn the deeper aspects of life? Or are you going to continue your life the same way and be unaware of the background to what's going on? So I started getting back into astrology and knowing that wasn't my calling, but I didn't know what was. And when I discovered Feng Shui, it was like an immediate aha. I've always been fascinated with spaces and how they make us feel. When I was a kid, I thought maybe I'd be an architect, but I never went that route. And when I discovered Feng Shui and I started training in it, I realized that it encapsulated like everything that I was fascinated about: architecture, environmentalism, connection to the earth, astrology, divination, meditation, and the spiritual aspects of life. So it was just an immediate love and passion. So I've been doing that now since 2005. I just love it. Would never go back.
Excellent, really good. So you mentioned there where you, in ordinary everyday life, well, we say ordinary everyday life. I mean, what we do now is ordinary and everyday as well. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we share, is that you're very grounded in the work that you do. It has a spiritual power to it, but you're still very grounded, like the way that I try to work too. But you said that in your ordinary everyday life as a marketing manager, you had a few curveballs and a few instances where life was really throwing up some challenges. Could you share any of those, or are they too personal? Do you want
Certainly.
to share a big example of what spirit effectively does to us?
Absolutely. Well, just briefly, when I was 10, my father passed away. And that was kind of the impetus for me to start thinking more deeply as a child to what is going on with this life. And it is certainly not all what I thought it was. So it got me thinking a lot more deeply. And then in my mid to late 30s, my mother got cancer and was going through several years of battling that particular illness. And at the same time, I was having a lot of challenges with my daughter. And then my mom passed away when I was 38. Thankfully, I started getting into yoga, meditation, astrology. I realized that, I did a lot of inner work, and I realized that this is that turning point. Do I see this as a gift, or do I see myself as a victim? And I think up until then, I thought myself as a victim, and I just kind of flipped it on its dime, and I said, no, I am empowered. I am divinely guided to learn from this and to really bring in that energy of divine spiritual connection into my life.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because it's I'm sure you're doing exactly the same thing with your clients, where very often you're actually helping them see that the issues and the trials that they're going through, although they're very real, they also can have a flip side in exactly the same way as you've just described, that they can become the very gifts that the person can actually learn from and step on from.
It's a catalyst.
Yeah, you have to make those choices, don't you? So difficult times, very much so then. So once you kind of mastered your basic Feng Shui awareness and your training in Feng Shui, was that in the sort of Feng Shui that you do now, or was that a slightly different form?
Yeah, there are different types of Feng Shui, and they all have the same foundation of the flow of qi, the yin yang ideas of complementary opposites, and the 5 elements. And those are pretty, those are foundational concepts, and of course, connection to the land. Yes, and then I learned a form of Feng Shui called the Black Sect Tibetan Buddhist form, which is actually a more modern approach to Feng Shui, because it has a layer of that real spiritual connection to the divine. And it has mantras and mudras and meditations and sacred remedies that we can employ, that's layered on top of regular Feng Shui.
You talked there about it's about the flow of qi and about getting the balance and the harmony of the yin and yang. Is there any more that you can kind of elaborate in ordinary layman terms about that?
Certainly. I mean, really the bigger picture. And I always like to kind of like pull back and say, like, what, we can get so mired in the details, and I unfortunately have that tendency. But if we like pull back and realize that Feng Shui was created in a time, thousands of years ago, perhaps 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, when we were living with the land and we were intrinsically connected to the land. But we needed to find the best location to live. So, there were shamans back then, the leaders of the tribes, and they would have a set of, tools to guide them on what is going to be the best place for our people to live. And it's just basic stuff. It's like location, location, location is everything. So it's, flowing water that's clean, that's ample for not only their living, but also to irrigate crops. Of course, soil that's healthy and alive, protection from the wind and from storms, just all the basic stuff of the land. So it's like we look at the formation of the land and those life-giving qualities of the land. And even now, really the land itself is 90% of our Feng Shui. Fortunate or unfortunate. And unfortunately, most of us, because we've grown so much and we've taken over the land, we're living in places that would never have been picked to build upon. So, we have to take those locations and do the best we can within those areas to make them the best Feng Shui possible, welcoming positive qi and positive energy. And there's been over or 5,000 years, a lot of different techniques that have been brought into this practice to kind of, I like to say it's a dynamic practice. It's always growing. Like I said, the type of feng shui that I practice is a more modern approach. It only was developed like in the 70s and 80s. So 1970s and 80s. So it is a way of dealing with our modern world. And the fact that there's electromagnetic fields and, chemical toxins and all that stuff, that's all part of it as well.
Because interestingly there, you were saying that the physical form of the land, it accounts for maybe 80 or 90% of the sort of basis of Feng Shui. But then earlier on, you were talking about, given the modern aspect of the work that you do, it's very much a spiritual connection. So just tell me a little bit about how you see that spiritual connection kind of tying in with the physical in the work that you do, if you can.
Yeah, so I do a lot of earth energy work, like you do. I've incorporated that into my practice, and I was so lucky to have my first teacher was Jill Hale, who is also a Brit, and she taught me a little bit about the dowsing, but also about looking at the land and visually, physically seeing how healthy it is and how, where there's vitality and where there's illness and disease, but also being able to kind of drop in and just get a sense of the spirit of the place. I like to call it the guardian of the site, doing some kind of intuitive connection to the land and seeing what it might need, where it needs to be supported to help create better vitality on the land, not only for the nature, spirits, and elemental beings, but also for the people that live there.
Yeah, because fundamentally what you're getting at, I guess, is that we're, as you said earlier, we're intrinsically connected to where we live, and the physical existence that we live in is very much an extension of us anyway, as much as we are of it. I suppose that's really where you're going with all of this, isn't it?
Absolutely, and one of the kind of phrases in feng shui is that our home, but it's not just our home; it's our land, wherever we live, is a mirror reflection of what's going on for us. So we can. It's a very psychological connection. And one of those famous quotes from Winston Churchill is, "We shape our buildings and then our buildings shape us." I'm paraphrasing, but it is so true. And in feng shui, we look at, you purchased this home or you rented this home, you decided to live here. This space has something to teach you. It is going to either show you those weaknesses and places where you need to grow, or be able to give you that vitality of success and prosperity and abundance in all ways. So, it is no coincidence where you happen to live, right? It was, you were attracted to that space, and, you are totally connected with it.
You've written this rather interesting looking book, Creating Luminous Spaces. Use the 5 elements of balance and harmony in your home and in your life. So tell me a little bit about that book.
I was introduced to the 5 elements in my very first class in feng shui and immediately was hooked, because the 5 elements I saw right away are archetypes of energy. And that's what attracted me to astrology to begin with, is the archetypes of the planets and the elements within those, the 4 elements. But coming from Eastern philosophy, it's the 5 elements, which are wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And I saw that these elements were a way to connect to the elements in nature, to the elements within our inner nature. And I was taught that these 5 elements not only have physical connections to our body, organ systems within our body. So traditional Chinese medicine uses the elements, but it is also connected with personality traits. So I just saw this wonderful way of helping people connect inner to their fire and outer to the fire in their environment and to the wood and so on. So and then I started working with clients on this and realizing that clients that were often that we each have like a primary element that is our predominant element throughout our life. So I would see sometimes people that had their primary element being drained or unsupported in their environment, in their homes, in their bedrooms, or their main living spaces. So I would give them ideas of how to support that element there. And it really helped with people. So I started developing these case studies, which are throughout the book. And there's a chapter on each element. So I really drill down into all the layers of the element from outer nature all the way into our inner nature. And then ideas of how they can make tweaks to their environment to support their primary element.
Do you have like a typical client that you find approaches you?
Well, obviously people who come to our type of disciplines are open to understanding there's another layer going on that they can't see, but they can somehow feel. Oftentimes people are going through some trauma in their life or some major life change, and they're looking for support in that way. Sometimes I get people that approach me that say, I know there's something going on with my home. I've never felt like it was home. And, I need to feel that because I'm, things aren't going right. So it's really interesting. It's really fascinating.
It was interesting that you say that particular example about, people just not feeling comfortable in their homes, because I get that sort of client coming to me quite a lot. And what we find in the floor plan when we start to analyze it from my sort of modality, the healing, house healing in that sense, is completely varied. It doesn't mean that there's the same sort of presenting issues on the floor plan, but there's just interesting similarity. One of the other things that I've noticed since doing this sort of work as one-to-one is that there's always the third aspect of the universe, of the spiritual aspect being present within the 1, 2, and 3 as a client sort of relationship. So I'm always learning from each client case really interesting things, not only about the client and the circumstance, but also about myself. Do you find the same with your Feng Shui work?
Yes, absolutely. And every single consultation project is unique. And it's always a learning experience. And there's often times when I hear myself saying words and I go, oh yeah, I've got to remember that too, right? They're talking to me too.
One of the things that I find really interesting is that it really, really does tell us something about the nature of being human. What I've learned probably more in the last 3 years than any other time in my life, with having had some pretty strange experiences anyway up to that point, but that human beings are just simply not what we appear to be. And the true power of the human being is very much within the spiritual subjective experience, which of course is in complete contrast to the scientific way of looking at life, which is very objective. I just wonder whether you felt similar, or whether you had any kind of observations on that sort of feeling about that.
I think people, at least people who've come to me, most of them really crave a deeper spiritual connection, and they're living lives oftentimes very surface. And when I start talking about this deeper layer, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is what I was looking for, and I didn't even know it. When I introduce people to kind of connect to their home through this like little meditation sometimes I give, they're shocked at like messages they get. They just have never explored like things in that way, life in that way before, and it can be very eye-opening for them. I find that they really do crave that deeper connection with the world and with the divine, and kind of making, like you were talking about, a trinity of you, the client, and the management, I know you call it. I love that. And Eastern philosophy, we talk about the Trinity as heaven, humanity, and earth, as this kind of connection, and that we are the link between the two.
Yeah.
When we activate ourselves, when we're aware. And that, I think, is kind of where we are heading with our human consciousness, is really activating that divine connection between the two.
It does really encapsulate the importance of the human being as a spiritual being. And I think that that's really interesting. I think everything that you've been talking about is about that connection, the spiritual aspect of the human being, which again is, we're not what we seem to be. We're having this chat at the beginning of April, which of course is when we have the global pandemic going on out there, or should I say in here. Have you got any kind of view about perhaps the way that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think most of us who do any kind of energy healing see this as the kind of the rally cry from Mother Nature, to pause and to reevaluate where we're heading, and to give us that opportunity to make some changes. After this is over, I think that this work is going to be acknowledged by a greater number than ever before. That is my hope. Maybe I'm a little naive, optimistic, maybe.
I don't think you're either of those things. I think it's, well, maybe you're optimistic, but I would like to share the optimism. I think that that's the right standpoint. I think that there's the need for a spiritual connection is in everybody, even if they don't realize it, and that's quite often part of the problem that they're experiencing within their life, is resulting from that lack of spiritual connection. And I guess that's what we do for people. We help open the door to them. So anything else that we'll start to draw this to a close, but anything else you'd like to say about your rather wonderful...
That title got really long because my publisher picked that photo, which I loved. But I realized that the title, the way it was, made it look like it was more about interior design and interior decor than this inner healing work. So that's why I had them modify the title, and thankfully they agreed. But really, again, stepping back, the big picture in this book is not so much about the 5 elements or feng shui. It's about restoring our connection to Mother Earth. And it is about helping us pretty, I think about it now, pretty interesting that it's about bringing nature inside, or there's a discipline called biophilic design, and that's about bringing nature indoors, and that's been around only for a couple of decades. It's still on the fringe, but it's really growing. Like Google and Etsy and Amazon, they all know about it because they built their headquarters with biophilic design. But we can do that, and many of us have spaces that are connected to nature. Like, look at that gorgeous stone wall behind you. Of course. Oh man.
Well, I keep threatening to paint it, but something's stopping me from doing it. So we'll see.
Yeah, it is just beautiful. The patina of the stone is just, it's incredible. And the wood. But, many spaces really need that deeper connection. And you start with plants. I mean, that's an easy That's an easy ad, but I tell you, if you start looking at homes, so many homes that just feel, they could be beautiful, but they just feel dead or lifeless. And then you go, oh, there's no plants. And then I ask my client and they'll say, oh, I'm terrible with plants. They always die on me. Like, you know, I've got a list of plants that can tolerate a little bit of neglect. You know, why don't you try them? Maybe you tried bonsai, you know, and of course they die easy, but you know, I try to get clients to do that. So that's really what this book is about, is to get people to acknowledge bringing nature inside. And like right now, wow, more than ever, we need that. We need our spaces to feel that nature, even if we aren't able to get out into it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much, Maureen. That's been absolutely wonderful.
Great. Thanks, Tim. It was great to talk.